My name is Nora Campbell. I am 42 years old, and for 12 years, I let my parents believe I was a ghost. A decade ago, I stood in the center of my own apartment, looking at a catered dinner for 15 people that no one was ever going to eat. I had spent 2 months planning my 30th birthday. I paid the deposit, sent the invitations, and asked for exactly one evening where my family's universe did not revolve around my older brother. 2 days before the reservation, my mother called to cancel. My 28-year-old brother Brent had called them weeping, claiming his identity had been stolen and his landlord was changing the locks on his apartment. My parents did not ask for a police report. They did not call his bank. They emptied their savings and drove across the state to rescue him from a crisis he invented to cover a casino debt. On the phone, my mother actually sighed and told me I was the capable one, so she knew I would understand. I did not scream. I did not beg them to stay. I hung up the phone, packed my apartment, changed my number, and moved 3 hours away. I let the silence stretch for over a decade. Until this past Tuesday, when the receptionist at my corporate office called my desk to say my parents were standing in the lobby holding a contract that was going to ruin their lives. Welcome to Orange Vengeance, where quiet boundaries break loud cycles, and the truth always keeps the receipts. If you have ever stopped arguing and started walking, you are in the right place. Drop a comment telling me your age and where you are listening from today, and be sure to subscribe. Let me take you back 12 years to that Friday in St. Louis, because you need to understand the quiet before you can understand the storm. I was a logistics coordinator, then used to managing freight schedules and inventory counts. I applied that same precision to my birthday dinner. I ordered roasted rosemary chicken and warm artisan bread from a local caterer. I bought a dress I could barely afford. I wanted one night to celebrate surviving my 20s in a family that treated my achievements like footnotes to Brent's chaotic failures. The phone rang at 7 in the evening. I answered, expecting my mother to ask about the dress code. Instead, Linda spoke in that rushed, breathless tone she always reserved for a fresh emergency. "Nora, honey, we have to postpone," she said, the background noise indicating she was already packing a suitcase. "Brent is in terrible trouble. Someone stole his credit cards and he is being evicted tomorrow morning. Your father and I are heading to Kansas City right now." I closed my eyes. A mutual friend from my hometown had mentioned seeing Brent at a riverboat casino the previous night. There was no identity theft. There was only Brent losing his rent money at a blackjack table and relying on the bank of Thomas and Linda to bail him out. "Mom, he was at a casino yesterday," I said, keeping my voice flat. "He is lying to you." "How can you be so cruel at a time like this?" she snapped. The reprimand was sharp and practiced. "Your brother is having a panic attack. We are his parents. Family takes care of family, Nora. You are the strong one. You can handle a delayed dinner." She hung up. I stood in my kitchen while the evening light faded. The catering platters sat on the granite counter, condensation pooling slowly around the edges of the aluminum foil. The smell of roasted rosemary filled the room, rich and useless. In the hallway, my grandmother's antique clock ticked, rhythmic and indifferent. I realized standing there that my family had profoundly misread me. They mistook my silent endurance for infinite patience. They assumed that because I never threw a tantrum, I would simply accept the back seat forever. They relied on my competence so they could subsidize his incompetence. I did not shed a single tear. Grief requires a sense of loss, and I suddenly felt incredibly light. I spent my birthday weekend breaking down my life. By Sunday night, the cardboard boxes were taped and stacked. By Monday morning, I sat in my manager's office and requested a transfer to our distribution hub in central Missouri. By the end of the month, my phone number was changed and I left no forwarding address. I moved to a mid-sized agricultural hub surrounded by cornfields and shipping depots. Missouri is known as the show-me state. The culture here runs on pragmatism. We value hard proof over empty rhetoric. I adopted that ethos as my religion. I traded a family built on unreliable promises for a career in supply chain logistics. I track grain yields, verify transport manifests, and calculate freight margins. If the numbers do not balance, the truck does not move. The math is honest. The math does not ask you to sacrifice your birthday for a lie. Over the next 12 years, I built a fortress of quiet competence. I rose to the position of Director of Supply Chain Logistics for a major Midwest agricultural distributor. I bought a brick house with a wraparound porch. I built a substantial retirement fund. I surrounded myself with colleagues and mentors who valued performance over drama. I never checked my parents' social media. I never reached out on holidays. Peace is not the absence of conflict. Peace is the presence of unshakable boundaries. I assumed they were living their lives, continuing to catch Brent every time he decided to jump. Then Tuesday morning arrived. The autumn sun was bright against the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office. I was reviewing a quarterly shipping manifest when my desk phone chimed. It was Sarah, the receptionist down in the main lobby. "Ms. Campbell, I am so sorry to interrupt," Sarah said, sounding slightly confused. "There is an older couple down here, Thomas and Linda Campbell. They say they are your parents and it is a family emergency." I set my pen down. The ink left a tiny black dot on the crisp white paper. 12 years of silence unbroken by a single letter or email, and they were standing on the ground floor of my building. I stood up and walked to the window. Below me, 18-wheelers idled in perfect alignment at the loading docks, waiting for my authorization to move. I smoothed the lapel of my navy blazer. I knew they had not come to apologize for the past decade. People like Thomas and Linda do not drive 3 hours across the state to mend a bridge. They drive 3 hours because the golden child has finally broken a machine they lack the tools to fix. I walked out of my office down the carpeted hallway and pressed the button for the elevator. The descent took 30 seconds. The doors slid open to the expansive glass lobby. I saw them immediately. Thomas and Linda looked older, weathered by a decade of whatever crises Brent had dragged them through. My father's shoulders slumped inside a faded jacket. My mother clutched a thick manila envelope to her chest like a shield. They looked frantic, their eyes darting around the polished corporate environment, searching for the daughter they had discarded. When my mother spotted me, she did not drop the envelope. She did not open her arms for a hug. She rushed forward, her face twisted in a mask of practiced panic, skipping over 12 years of absence as if we had spoken yesterday. "No, thank God," she gasped, thrusting the thick envelope toward me. "Brent is in terrible trouble. The bank is going to take the family farm and we need your signature right now." I looked at the thick manila envelope trembling in my mother's hands. She did not ask how I was doing. She did not remark on the 12 years that had passed since I packed my apartment in St. Louis. She simply picked up the script right where we had left off. Brent was in trouble. I was required to fix it. Before I reached for that paperwork, I let the silence hang in the polished glass lobby. I needed to look at them. I needed to see what a decade of funding Brent's weaponized incompetence had done to my parents. Weaponized incompetence is a very specific type of family dynamic. It is not mere laziness or bad luck. It is a calculated strategy. Brent realized very early in life that if he failed loudly enough, my parents would rush to catch him, proving their own worth by playing the eternal saviors. He did not just stumble through his 20s. He orchestrated intricate disasters that demanded parental sacrifice. There was the fabricated car accident when he was 22. He claimed a phantom delivery truck ran his sedan off a rural highway in the middle of the night. There was no police report, no insurance claim, and no hospital visit. He insisted he needed cash immediately to avoid a catastrophic insurance hike. My parents did not ask for photographic evidence of the intersection. They went to the dealership and signed the loan for a brand new truck. There was the prestigious job offer in Chicago when he was 25. He told them he had been headhunted for a senior marketing role, but the firm required a $5,000 relocation and wardrobe fee up front. I saw the offer letter sitting on the kitchen counter. The corporate logo was pixelated and the margins were misaligned. I spent 3 minutes on the internet and found the exact template he had downloaded. When I showed the proof to my father, Thomas accused me of trying to sabotage my brother's success out of spite. They wrote Brent the check. The Chicago firm mysteriously declared bankruptcy 2 days before his start date, and the money was never mentioned again. There were the vague legal threats, the sudden medical scares that required out-of-pocket treatments, and the business ventures that always needed one final injection of seed capital to become profitable. I absorbed a different lesson from growing up in that house. I learned that Missouri is called the Show Me State for a reason. The cultural bedrock here is pragmatic. Words are cheap, tears are manipulative, and promises evaporate. Only proof matters. My career in supply chain logistics is built entirely on that philosophy. A shipment of fertilizer does not travel from a warehouse in Springfield to a farm in Colombia based on a good intention. It moves because the invoice is paid, the manifest is signed, and the load weight is verified on a certified scale. My parents operated a dual currency system. For Brent, panic and sorrow were acceptable legal tender. For me, the standard was empirical evidence. When I earned a collegiate academic scholarship, my father asked to see the official university letterhead before he would offer a congratulatory nod. I brought him the paper. I showed him the math. They audited my modest grocery receipts while handing my brother blank checks. Because I required no saving, I became the administrative daughter. I was the ghost in the machine fixing the background mechanics of our family, so Brent could remain the star of the stage. When Brent forgot to renew his vehicle registration and received a steep fine, I was the one who navigated the municipal website, printed the forms, and mailed the penalty fee from my parents' joint account. When he caused a drunken scene at a cousin's wedding, I was the one who quietly approached the venue manager with a credit card to pay for the broken glassware. My competence was treated as a basic household utility, like electricity or running water. You do not thank the water for running, you just expect it to be there. Brent's chaos, meanwhile, was treated as a tragic circumstance entirely outside of his control. Looking at Thomas and Linda, now standing on the polished marble floor of my corporate building, I could see the final toll of their investment. They looked aged far beyond their chronological years. Thomas had lost the confident, broad-shouldered posture he carried in my youth. His suit jacket hung loosely over his frame, and the skin around his jaw sagged with exhaustion. Linda's hands shook slightly as she pressed the envelope against her chest. Her makeup was hurriedly applied, failing to hide the deep dark circles under her eyes. A dozen years is a long time to carry a parasite. They did not start with an apology for the 12 years of silence. They did not say they had missed me. "Nora, please," Thomas said, stepping forward. His voice was brittle, stripped of the old patriarchal authority. "Brent made a bad investment. We put the farm up to help him secure a loan. Now the bank is calling the note and we are going to lose the land." The Campbell Farm is a 300-acre parcel of rich agricultural soil in the southern part of the state. It has been in our family for 4 generations. My great-grandfather broke that dirt. My grandfather poured his life into maintaining the equipment and the silos. My father inherited the property free and clear of all debts. It was the one untouchable asset in our family portfolio. It was our legacy. Now Linda was standing in my lobby, telling me they had gambled a century of family history on Brent's latest fiction. "We need your signature," Thomas echoed, his eyes wide and pleading. "If you just sign as a guarantor, the bank will give us a restructuring extension. Your credit is perfect, Nora. We checked. You have the income to back the loan. We will lose the ancestral land if you do not sign this today." I looked at the envelope. I looked at the parents who had canceled my milestone birthday to cover a gambling debt. After a dozen years of treating me like a ghost, they had tracked me down because their golden child had finally manufactured a disaster too expensive for them to finance alone. They expected me to revert instantly to the administrative daughter. They expected me to take the paperwork, fix the mechanics, and disappear back into the scenery. I did not reach for the envelope. I looked at Sarah, the receptionist, who was watching the exchange with wide eyes from behind her mahogany desk. I gave her a subtle, reassuring nod. Then I looked back at the people who had raised me. I did not raise my voice. I did not betray a single ounce of the cold, clarifying anger settling into my chest. "I will not discuss financial liabilities in a public lobby." I said, my voice as flat and even as a dial tone. "I will give you exactly 15 minutes. Follow me." I turned on my heel and walked toward the security desk. My parents followed their footsteps, echoing on the polished marble tile of the corporate lobby. My mother began to sniffle. It was a soft, calculated sound designed to elicit immediate sympathy from anyone within earshot. For a decade and 2 years, I had not heard that specific pitch of manufactured sorrow. I used the time away to construct a life that functioned on pure logic. When I arrived in central Missouri all those years ago, I started as a mid-level coordinator in agricultural logistics. This is a rigorous field where you track every single soybean from a muddy field in the boot heel to a cargo ship waiting in New Orleans. You measure moisture content, schedule rail cars, calculate fuel surcharges, and audit barge freight manifests on the Mississippi River. A single missing decimal point can cost a distributor hundreds of thousands of dollars. In this industry, excuses do not pay the diesel bill. You either deliver the yield or you lose the contract. I thrived in that exactitude because numbers do not manipulate you. Numbers do not cancel your birthday. I channeled my formidable energy into building a fortress around my independence. I purchased a sturdy brick home on a quiet cul-de-sac far from the chaotic gravitational pull of my family. I maximized my retirement contributions every year, watching a robust financial safety net grow through the reliable magic of compound interest. I curated a circle of colleagues and neighbors who valued reliability over theatrics. In my world, people showed up on time, did the work, and went home without demanding a parade for meeting basic adult obligations. I built a sanctuary where performance mattered more than drama. My most important connection came during my 4th year at the company. Harlan Vance was a retired county judge who consulted for our firm on land disputes and transport easements. Harlan was a pragmatic, sharp-minded man who treated the law like a structural schematic. We bonded over our shared disdain for inefficiency and sloppy paperwork. When I mentioned my estrangement from my family over a quiet cup of coffee one morning, he did not offer pity. He offered a masterclass in asset protection. Harlan taught me the intricate realities of Missouri real estate law. He showed me how to read property deeds, trace lien histories, and understand the mechanics of corporate shielding. He explained how to structure property ownership under limited liability companies to prevent toxic relatives from finding your assets through public database searches. He showed me how predators hide bad debt inside convoluted legal structures and how to spot the trapdoors hidden in the fine print of loan agreements. Harlan gave me the vocabulary and the legal armor to defend my sanctuary. He also helped me solidify my core philosophy. People often confuse peace with a lack of overt fighting. They believe that keeping quiet and giving in creates harmony. Harlan taught me that peace is not the absence of conflict. Peace is the presence of unshakable boundaries. You do not achieve tranquility by letting people walk all over you in silence. You achieve it by building a heavy gate, locking it, and refusing to hand over the key to anyone who has proven they will burn your house down. My mother continued her soft crying as we reached the security turnstiles. In the past, that sound would have triggered my ingrained administrative response. My heart would have raced. I would have rushed to comfort her, asked what was wrong, and immediately offered to shoulder whatever burden Brent had created. That was the role they conditioned me to play. They expected me to instantly metabolize their poison so they could feel better about producing it. They assumed my 12-year absence was just a long pout, a temporary rebellion that would evaporate the second they showed up in distress. They believed the old buttons would still work if they just pushed hard enough. They were wrong. I approached the security guard, a retired police officer named Marcus, who printed 2 temporary visitor badges and handed them to me, along with plastic lanyards. I turned and handed the badges to Thomas and Linda. I did not soften my gaze. I did not ask if my mother needed a tissue or a glass of water. I did not offer a single word of comfort. Clip these to your collars. I instructed, my voice polite but entirely devoid of warmth. Follow me to the elevators. We rode up to the 3rd floor in heavy silence. The only sound was the mechanical hum of the elevator and Linda's performative sniffling. When the doors opened, I led them down a long hallway lined with acoustic panels. I bypassed my comfortable corner office and directed them to a sterile, windowless conference room used exclusively for hostile vendor negotiations. The space was purposefully designed to strip emotion from business transactions. The walls were painted a flat gray. The fluorescent lighting was bright and clinical. The center of the room featured a long, heavy glass table surrounded by rigid, ergonomic mesh chairs. The air conditioning hummed, keeping the room deliberately cold. It was the perfect environment for dismantling a lie. I gestured toward two chairs on the far side of the glass table. Thomas and Linda sat down. They looked incredibly small and out of place in the corporate chill. Their clothes looked rumpled, their posture defeated. I took a seat directly across from them, folding my hands neatly over my leather folio. I did not lean forward. I glanced at the digital clock mounted on the gray wall. It read 10:14 in the morning. I have a scheduled supply chain logistics review at 10:30. I said, looking directly into my father's eyes. I will give you exactly 15 minutes to present your case. Speak clearly and stick to the facts. My mother gasped, finally dropping the soft crying act. Her face contorted into genuine unvarnished shock. She looked at me as if I were speaking a foreign language. She expected a daughter eager to earn back her parents' love, someone who would weep at the sight of them and beg for reconciliation. She found a director of logistics who viewed them as a high-risk liability to be managed on a strict timetable. Thomas swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. He placed his hands on the glass table, his knuckles were white. He looked at me, searching for the compliant girl who used to fix his computer and pay Brent's parking tickets. Nora, you must understand the severity of this situation, Thomas said, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and lingering authority. Brent was trying to build an agricultural business. He had a solid plan. He took out a commercial loan to get the equipment, and the farm is tied to it as collateral. The startup failed, Nora. The creditors are circling. If we do not provide a guarantor with a pristine financial record today, the bank will initiate foreclosure proceedings on the Campbell land. He reached into the manila envelope he had taken from my mother. His hands were shaking visibly as he pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. The paper was crisp, but the edges were slightly curled as if the packet had been nervously handled and restacked for days on end. He placed his hand flat on top of the pages. We just need a co-signer to extend the terms, Thomas pleaded. Just to restructure the debt and buy us some time. You are the only one who can save the farm. He slid the suspiciously thick real estate contract across the smooth glass surface toward me. The thick stack of paper sat between us on the cold glass. I looked at the top page. It was a commercial restructuring agreement, or at least it was dressed up to look like one. Thomas kept his hand resting near the edge of the document, as if he were afraid it might blow away in the air conditioning. I reached into my blazer pocket, pulled out my reading glasses, and unfolded the frames. I did not speak right away. I let the silence stretch, forcing them to sit in the discomfort of their own request. Brent had a vision. Thomas started breaking the quiet. His voice carried the desperate cadence of a salesman who does not believe in his own product. He wanted to modernize the South acreage, drone soil sampling, automated irrigation, a whole agricultural tech startup. He said it was the future of farming in Missouri. He just needed initial capital to get the equipment and hire a team. We signed the deed over as collateral because the local credit union required a hard asset. Linda nodded enthusiastically, dabbing her dry eyes with a crumpled tissue. He worked so hard, Nora. You know how passionate your brother gets when he has an idea. But the supply chain issues ruined everything. The equipment got delayed, the software licenses fell through, and the creditors started demanding their money back. He is heartbroken. I looked at my mother. I thought about the logistics of launching an agricultural tech startup. You need business plans, vendor contracts, environmental impact studies, and a functioning knowledge of agronomy. Brent could not keep a cactus alive in a window box, let alone program a drone to map soil pH levels. My parents had handed him the deed to a century-old farm based on a few buzzwords he likely read in a magazine. I pulled the contract closer. I did not bother reading the summary page. Amateurs read the summary, professionals read the definitions and the default clauses. I flipped past the signature lines and began scanning the dense paragraphs of the addendum. My daily routine involves auditing expensive freight contracts. Finding the trapdoor in a document is my primary skill set. It took me less than 3 minutes to find the first anomaly. The lender listed on page 4 was not a regional agricultural lender. It was not a community bank. It was an entity named Horizon Holdings, LLC, registered to a post office box in Delaware. Legitimate Midwest farming loans are underwritten by institutions with physical branches and loan officers who know the difference between winter wheat and soybeans. Horizon Holdings read like a predatory private equity shell company. I flipped to the financial schedules. The interest rate was buried in a dense block of text on page 9. Are you aware this is an adjustable rate note tied to a private index, not the prime rate? I asked, looking up over the rim of my glasses. The introductory rate expires in 90 days. After that, the interest compounds monthly at 22%. This is not a standard agricultural restructuring loan. This is a predatory instrument designed to force a default. Thomas blinked, his brow furrowing. He looked at Linda, who looked back at him blankly. Brent said his lawyer negotiated a standard extension. Thomas stammered, rubbing his jaw. He said the rate was fixed. We just need a guarantor with a high credit score to satisfy the underwriters. Did you meet this lawyer? I asked. Brent handled the legal side, Linda said defensively. He wanted to take responsibility for the business. We just signed the guarantee. I turned to the guarantor obligations on page 14. The wording was ruthless. It contained a cross-collateralization clause. If I sign this paper, I am not just vouching for Brent. I explained, keeping my tone instructional as if I were training a new intern on compliance protocols. This clause dictates that any asset held by the guarantor is subject to seizure upon default. That includes my house, my retirement accounts, and my personal savings. If your son misses a single payment, Horizon Holdings can place a lien on everything I own. He is not going to miss a payment, Thomas insisted, his voice rising in volume. The startup is just pivoting. He has a buyer lined up for the drone patents. He just needs a bridge loan to get through the quarter. The farm has been in this family for 4 generations, Nora. We cannot be the ones who lose it to a bank. It is not a bank, I corrected him. And you have already lost it. You gave away the equity the day you signed the initial collateral agreement. My father's face flushed. The realization that his authority held zero weight in this room was beginning to manifest. He leaned forward, placing both hands flat on the glass table, leaning into the tactic he had used to control his household for 40 years. He deployed the phrase that had always served as the ultimate trump card in the Campbell family. Family takes care of family, Nora, he said, his voice dropping an octave meant to convey deep moral weight. Your brother is drowning. We are drowning. You have more than enough money to protect this legacy. I stared at him. The air conditioning hummed above us. The phrase echoed in my mind, pulling me backward through time. Family takes care of family. I pictured the untouched catered dinner sitting on my granite counter 12 years ago. I smelled the roasted rosemary. I heard the ticking of the antique clock. I remembered the exact pitch of my mother's voice when she told me to cancel my 30th birthday because Brent had lost his rent money in a casino. They did not care about family. They cared about preserving the illusion of Brent. I realized in that moment that confronting them with facts would be a waste of breath. If I told them Brent was lying, they would accuse me of jealousy. If I refused outright, they would cause a scene in my corporate lobby. The most strategic move was a tactical retreat. I closed the contract. I tapped the thick stack of paper against the glass table, aligning the edges perfectly, and placed it back into the manila envelope. I handed the envelope across the table to my father. These terms are highly complex, I said, offering a smooth professional smile that did not reach my eyes. As a corporate director, I never sign legal instruments without consulting my own counsel. I need 48 hours to review the paperwork and verify the amortization schedules. I will contact you on Thursday. The transformation was instantaneous. The tension drained from my father's shoulders. My mother released a loud, dramatic sigh of relief, pressing her hand to her chest. They heard what they wanted to hear. They believed my request for time was a concession. They thought the old administrative daughter had returned ready to fix the background mechanics and assume the financial risk. They believed they had successfully manipulated me. Thank you, sweetheart, Linda said, offering a watery smile as she stood up. I knew we could count on you. Brent will be so relieved. Thursday, Thomas confirmed, slipping the envelope under his arm. We will wait for your call. I stood up and escorted them back to the elevator. I watched the metal doors slide shut, obscuring their relieved faces. I walked back down the quiet, carpeted hallway to my corner office. I closed the heavy oak door. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. I had no intention of signing that contract. I had no intention of calling them on Thursday with a polite refusal. They brought a forged crisis into my sanctuary, and they expected me to finance it. Instead, I was going to audit my brother's entire existence. In Missouri, property deed zoning applications and corporate registrations are public records. If you know how to navigate the county databases, you can trace any dollar to its true origin. Harlan Vance had taught me how to read the digital breadcrumbs that desperate men leave behind. I accessed the state business portal first. I searched for the agricultural tech startup Brent had supposedly founded. The database returned 0 results for his name, matching any active agricultural entity in our home county. There were no drone patents. There was no crop testing company. I cross-referenced his name with the Missouri Secretary of State Registry. A single hit appeared. Brent Campbell was listed as the registered agent for an entity called Campbell Commercial Development Group, LLC. The company had been formed 18 months ago. I switched over to the county assessor's database. I pulled up the parcel identification number for our family's farm. I clicked on the deed history tab. The most recent transaction was a lien filed by Horizon Holdings. But there was a secondary document attached to the parcel, a public notice filed with the local municipal planning commission. I opened the PDF attachment and zoomed in on the text. It was a formal petition to rezone the southern 50 acres of the Campbell farm from agricultural use to heavy commercial use. The application cited an intent to construct a sprawling industrial warehousing facility. The signature at the bottom of the petition belonged to Brent. I leaned back in my chair. The autumn sunlight caught the edge of my monitor. Brent had not failed at a farming startup. He was actively attempting to pave over my grandfather's soil to build concrete distribution warehouses, and he was using predatory private equity loans to fund his lifestyle while the zoning board processed his application. The restructuring loan he wanted me to sign was designed to transfer his toxic debt onto my clean credit, allowing him to walk away free and clear with the impending commercial real estate payout. I was trying to steal the land, and he was trying to make me pay for the theft. I stared at the digital glow of the zoning petition on my monitor. Brent Campbell was attempting to erase a century of agricultural history to build concrete distribution centers. He had leveraged the soil our great-grandfather tilled to finance a shell company. I did not slam my laptop shut. I did not scream into the empty office. I took a deep breath, picked up my desk phone, and dialed Harlan Vance. Harlan answered on the second ring. His voice carried the gravelly weight of a man who had spent 3 decades sitting on a county bench, listening to people lie under oath regarding property lines and inheritances. "Nora," he said, the greeting warm but efficient. "You rarely call during the mid-morning freight rush. What is broken?" "I need you to look at a corporate registry for me," I said, keeping my tone perfectly level. Horizon Holdings LLC registered in Delaware, and a local entity called Campbell Commercial Development Group. I heard the rhythmic tapping of the keyboard on his end. Harlan maintained access to premium legal databases from his consulting work. He knew how to pierce the corporate veil of anonymous holding companies faster than any paralegal in the Midwest. "Give me 60 seconds, he muttered. The line went quiet, save for the clicking of keys. Then a low whistle filtered through the speaker. Horizon Holdings is a predatory equity shop. They specialize in high-risk distressed assets. They loan money at exorbitant rates, wait for the default, and seize the collateral to sell off the parts. Who in your orbit signed a note with them?" "My parents," I replied. "They put up the family farm as collateral, but the loan was orchestrated by my brother. He is applying for a commercial rezoning permit on the south acreage." Harlan sighed, a sound heavy with professional fatigue. "If he secures commercial zoning on agricultural land situated near a major highway, the property value quadruples overnight. Warehouse developers pay a premium for build-ready dirt. He is trying to flip the land." "And the restructuring contract they want me to sign?" I asked, though my logistics brain had already calculated the trajectory. "It is a release valve," Harlan confirmed. "If you sign as the guarantor, you absorb the toxic debt. Horizon Holdings gets a secure line of credit backed by your pristine financial record and your personal assets. Your brother gets the lien removed from the farm. He sells the newly zoned commercial land to a warehouse developer, pockets the multi-million-dollar payout free and clear, and leaves you holding the bag for his original predatory loan. Nora, this is not a family misunderstanding. This is a sophisticated financial crime. I thanked Harlan, hung up the phone, and went to work. For the rest of the afternoon, I ignored the routine shipping manifests on my desk. I applied the ruthless efficiency of a supply chain audit to my own bloodline. I logged into the county tax databases. I pulled the property tax records for Brent's luxury apartment in Kansas City. I cross-referenced the dates of his lease agreements with the disbursement dates of the Horizon Holdings loan. The narrative became undeniably clear. There was no agricultural equipment. There were no drone patents or soil testing software licenses. Brent had taken a high-interest loan against my parents' property and funneled the cash directly into his personal checking account. He used the equity from my grandfather's sweat to lease a foreign sports car, rent a penthouse suite, and fund a lavish lifestyle 300 miles away. I was burning through the capital while he waited for the zoning board to approve his commercial application. But the municipal zoning board requires rigorous documentation. You cannot simply pave over agricultural land in Missouri without submitting environmental impact studies, traffic flow analyses, and notarized consent forms from the primary deed holders. I navigated to the Planning Commission portal and downloaded the entire public file for his application. I sent the files to the high-capacity printer down the hall. I walked to the copy room, retrieved the warm stack of paper, and carried it back to my office. I spread the pages across my desk, grabbed a red pen, and began dissecting the signatures. The environmental impact waiver required the signature of the primary property owners. Thomas and Linda Campbell were listed at the bottom of the page. I stared at the ink strokes. My mother has a very distinct looping cursive from decades of writing thank you notes and holiday cards. My father signs his name in a sharp, jagged scrawl. The signatures on the municipal waiver were overly precise. The pressure points were uniform. The loops were tight and hesitant. Someone had traced them. Brent had forged my parents' signatures on official government documents to bypass their oversight on the commercial rezoning process. They likely had no idea he was planning to sell the land out from under them. They truly believed he was building a farming tech company. I continued digging. I pulled the original loan origination documents filed with the county recorder of deeds. The same hesitant trace signatures appeared on the primary liability waivers. My brother had crossed a dangerous threshold. This was no longer a story of a spoiled son asking for a handout. This was wire fraud. This was document forgery. Because my parents were both over the age of 65, Missouri law classified this financial exploitation as elder abuse. I was facing significant state and federal felonies. I packed the printed documents into my leather briefcase, logged out of my computer, and drove home. That evening, my dining room ceased to function as a place for meals. It became a war room. I cleared the floral centerpiece and the woven placemats. I laid the printed corporate registrations, the deed transfers, and the forged signature pages across the polished oak table. I opened a fresh pack of highlighters and a stack of lined index cards. In supply chain logistics, you map a failure by tracing the route backward from the destination to the origin. I applied the same methodology to Brent's fraud. I wrote his desired outcome on a green index card. Sell commercial land to a warehouse developer for a substantial profit. I placed it at the far end of the table. I wrote his current obstacle on a yellow card. Predatory lender calling the note and seizing the land before the zoning is approved. I placed it in the middle. I wrote his solution on a red card. Trick Nora into assuming the debt liability. I placed it at the beginning of the timeline. I spent 3 hours drawing lines of connection. I highlighted the forged signatures in bright yellow. I highlighted the date discrepancies in neon pink. I matched the fraudulent shell company transfers to the deposits in his Kansas City bank accounts. I built a physical, undeniable map of a felony. I stood back and looked at the dining room table. The evidence was overwhelming. It was cold, empirical, and devastating. A weaker person might have picked up the phone right then, called their parents, and screamed the truth into the receiver. But I remembered the lesson from my 30th birthday. My parents preferred a comfortable fiction over a harsh reality. If I tried to explain this complex financial crime over the phone, they would panic call Brent and allow him to spin a new web of lies. He would convince them I was a jealous, bitter sister trying to sabotage his success with fake documents. They would believe him because believing him was their defining character trait. The truth could not be delivered through a screen. It had to be presented in an inescapable environment. It had to be cornered. I walked into my kitchen and poured a glass of cold water. I leaned against the counter looking at the illuminated display of my microwave clock. The green numbers glowed in the dim light. I felt a profound sense of calm wash over me, the anxiety of the past 12 years, the lingering hurt of being the discarded daughter, simply evaporated. I was no longer an unwanted child seeking validation. I was a logistics director, and I had identified a critical failure in the supply chain. I pulled my smartphone from my blazer pocket. I opened the text message thread containing my mother and father. I did not type a long emotional paragraph. I did not demand answers or issue threats. I matched the casual, polite tone they always used when they wanted something from me. I typed a single sentence. "Let's have dinner Friday with Brent to finalize things." The text message arrived on Wednesday morning, vibrating against the polished wood of my desk. The screen of my smartphone illuminated, displaying a name I had not seen on a caller ID in over a decade. Brent. He did not call. A phone call leaves room for unpredictable silences, and con artists detest unpredictable silences. He sent a text message adopting a tone of manufactured sibling camaraderie that made my stomach tighten. "Hey sis! Mom and Dad said we are doing dinner Friday. Glad you are finally stepping up for the family. We make a great team." I read the words twice. The sheer arrogance was breathtaking. He believed his trap was working perfectly. He assumed I was the same compliant administrative sister who used to pay his municipal parking tickets and fix his broken mechanics. He thought a few lines of cheap praise would ensure my signature on a document designed to ruin my financial future. In the world of supply chain logistics, when you discover a critical error in a vendor's shipping manifest, you do not immediately alert them to the discrepancy. You let them load the freight document, the missing pallets, and lock the trailer doors. You secure the proof before you reveal your hand. I typed my reply carefully, matching his casual tone to keep him comfortable in his delusion. "Looking forward to seeing everyone, Brent. We have a lot of paperwork to review." He sent back a thumbs up emoji. The hubris of the golden child is a predictable metric. They are so accustomed to being saved that they mistake preparation for submission. I locked my phone and gathered my printed evidence. I had a lunch appointment scheduled downtown with Harlan Vance. When I walked into the dark wood-paneled dining room of the local country club, Harlan was not alone. Sitting across from him in a leather booth was a woman in a tailored gray suit reviewing a thick binder. "Nora, I want you to meet Eleanor Shaw," Harlan said, gesturing to the woman as I slid into the booth. "Eleanor is a senior partner specializing in corporate litigation and commercial real estate fraud." I showed her the zoning petition you uncovered. Eleanor extended a firm hand. Her eyes were sharp, evaluating me with the clinical precision of a surgeon diagnosing a complex fracture. "Your brother has painted himself into a very dangerous corner," Eleanor began, wasting no time on pleasantries. "He is trying to flip agricultural land to a commercial warehouse developer. But developers of that scale do not buy encumbered dirt. They require a pristine title insurance policy before they break ground. Brent cannot provide a clean title because Horizon Holdings holds a primary lien on the property. That is why he needs you to assume the debt. The moment you sign the restructuring agreement, his shell company is released from the lien, the title clears, and he sells the land. And if I refuse to sign, I asked, though my logistics background already supplied the answer. "If you refuse, Horizon Holdings forecloses on your parents," Eleanor replied flatly. "But we are not going to wait for a simple refusal. We are going to build a detonator." Eleanor withdrew a legal pad and sketched a flowchart on the pristine white paper. Together we drafted a counter document. It was a formal notification of fraudulent conveyance addressed directly to the compliance department at Horizon Holdings. Private equity firms tolerate high risk, but they detest federal regulatory scrutiny. If they discovered that their collateral was tied to forged signatures and fraudulent municipal zoning applications, their internal covenants would trigger an immediate default. They would call the note due in full, freezing all of Brent's connected accounts. We finalized the document in under an hour. I placed it in my briefcase next to the forged environmental impact studies and the bank transfer records. I now held the exact legal mechanism required to dismantle his scheme, but possessing the weapon is only half the battle. Delivering it effectively requires the right environment. I drove back to my office and considered the venue for Friday night. My parents expected me to invite them to my home or perhaps meet them at a casual diner. Those are locations where family disputes traditionally occur. Living rooms and kitchens are built for emotional warfare. They are spaces where voices echo, tears flow, and hard facts are easily drowned out by loud accusations of betrayal. If I laid this evidence on my dining room table, Thomas would shout me down. Linda would weep, clutch her chest, and accuse me of fabricating the documents out of deep-seated jealousy. They would gather the papers, throw them in the fireplace, and blame me for being vindictive. They would call Brent, warn him of my audit, and give him time to hide his assets or flee the state. The truth could not be delivered in a private residence. It had to be forced into the light, trapped in an inescapable setting where social convention prohibited screaming and table flipping. I picked up my desk phone and dialed a prestigious steakhouse located in our hometown. It was an establishment. Thomas revered a place with white linen tablecloths, crystal glassware, and an atmosphere of hushed, expensive exclusivity. It was the same restaurant they used to visit to celebrate Brent's high school baseball victories, a place they had never once taken me. I requested their private dining room for Friday evening. I secured the reservation with my corporate card. An upscale restaurant demands strict decorum. My parents were obsessed with keeping up appearances. They would never cause a loud scene in a venue populated by the town's elite. The formal setting would serve as a psychological straitjacket, forcing them to sit in silence and look at the math. Thursday evening arrived with a cool autumn rain. I stood in my kitchen organizing the materials. In my industry, a successful presentation relies on flawless formatting. You do not hand a client a messy stack of loose papers. You provide a bound, indexed portfolio. I laid out 3 heavy-duty presentation folders on the granite counter. I placed a copy of Brent's fraudulent zoning application in each one. I followed it with the forged environmental waivers, the shell company registration, and the ledger showing the direct transfer of funds to his luxury apartment lease. I placed Eleanor's drafted notification of fraudulent conveyance at the very back. I used a 3-hole punch to align the pages perfectly. I secured them in the folders. I printed 3 identical labels using my home office label maker. I peeled the backing off the adhesive strips and pressed them onto the center of each folder. The labels read Asset Trace and Fraudulent Zoning Analysis. I ran my thumb over the raised lettering. The plastic was smooth and cool. There was no emotion in these folders. There were no tears over missed birthdays, no lingering resentment about being the discarded daughter, no pleas for parental affection. There was only data. I packed the 3 bound folders into my pristine leather briefcase. I placed my reading glasses in the side pocket. I clicked the brass locks shut. The sound was sharp and definitive, echoing briefly in the quiet house. I walked to the front window and looked out at the rain falling on the quiet street. Tomorrow night I would sit across from the people who had treated my life like a disposable utility. They would smile, order expensive cuts of meat, and expect me to sign away my future. I felt no fear. I felt no anxiety. I felt the steady, unwavering calm of a logistician who has already audited the route and identified the failure points. The battlefield was prepared. The trap was set. I turned off the kitchen light and went to sleep. I arrived at the Monarch Steakhouse 40 minutes before our scheduled reservation. The establishment represented the height of old money in our hometown. The air smelled of aged beef, melted butter, and expensive bourbon. I bypassed the crowded main dining floor and spoke directly to the host. He escorted me to the private room I had reserved for the evening. The space featured dark mahogany walls, heavy velvet curtains, and a long rectangular table set with crisp white linen. I arranged the seating with logistical intent. I placed Brent at the head of the table facing the door. Con artists thrive when they feel they command the room. I wanted him to possess a false sense of authority. I took the seat near the corner, positioning myself as the observer. I instructed the waitstaff to bring the check immediately after serving dessert, and requested that no one enter the room once the coffee was poured. I stood by the second-story window, looking down at the wet pavement of the valet stand. A sleek European sports car pulled into the loading zone. Brent stepped out, tossing his keys to the attendant with practiced nonchalance. He wore a tailored charcoal suit that fit perfectly over his shoulders, paired with a silk tie that cost more than a weekly grocery budget. He adjusted his cuffs, checking his reflection in the glass door. A moment later, Thomas and Linda arrived in their sensible sedan. They greeted Brent on the sidewalk. My mother threw her arms around his neck, hugging him, as if he had just returned from a long, arduous deployment. My father clapped him on the shoulder, beaming with unvarnished pride. They looked at him with pure, unadulterated adoration. They saw a successful entrepreneur, a visionary son, carrying the family legacy into the modern era. They did not see the man who had secretly pledged their ancestral soil to a predatory lender to finance the car he had just handed to the valet. They entered the private room a few minutes later, bringing a flurry of forced warmth. Brent walked over and kissed my cheek. He smelled of expensive cologne and peppermint. "Nora, you look great," he said, taking his seat at the head of the table. "Thanks for putting this together. It is good to have the family in one place." I offered a polite nod and opened my menu. Over the next 90 minutes, I ate a medium-rare ribeye and watched a masterclass in deception. Brent directed the conversation with effortless charm. He ordered top-tier appetizers, insisting that we celebrate the future of the Campbell farm. He spun a complex web of lies regarding his agricultural technology venture. He tossed around industry buzzwords discussing drone mapping, soil sensor integration, and venture capital acquisitions. He painted a picture of a flourishing enterprise perched on the edge of a lucrative breakthrough. My parents absorbed every word as gospel truth. Linda rested her chin on her hand, gazing at him with misty eyes. Thomas nodded along, occasionally interjecting to ask superficial questions that allowed Brent to sound even more authoritative. They never once asked for a business plan. They never requested to see a financial statement. They were entirely captivated by the performance. I cut my steak, chewed my food, and let him talk. In the logistics industry, you learn that liars hate silence. If you stay quiet long enough, a dishonest vendor will eventually volunteer the rope required to hang their own narrative. I asked a single mild question about local agricultural zoning ordinances. Brent waved his hand dismissively, laughing, as he claimed his legal team handled the boring municipal red tape. My parents chuckled in agreement, finding his blatant disregard for details charming. When the waiter cleared the dinner plates and returned with espresso and a slice of flourless chocolate cake, Brent shifted his posture. He unbuttoned his suit jacket, leaned forward, and transitioned smoothly from the visionary founder to the pragmatic brother, asking for a tiny administrative favor. "So, Nora, about that paperwork," Brent said, his voice dropping into a casual conspiratorial register. "I know Dad gave you the restructuring contract on Tuesday. It is really just a minor administrative hurdle. The underwriters are being overly cautious because the startup sector is volatile right now. They just want a secondary guarantor on file to satisfy their internal risk compliance." He reached into his leather satchel and pulled out the thick document. He slid it across the white linen tablecloth, positioning it directly in front of my coffee cup. He placed a heavy gold-plated pen on top of the signature page. "Your signature just acts as a bridge," Brent continued, offering a reassuring smile. "Once the venture capital funding clears next quarter, the loan gets retired and your name comes off the ledger. You will not have to lift a finger." Linda leaned forward, her voice soft and coaxing. "It would mean the world to us, Nora. You are perfectly suited to handle this kind of corporate detail. We can put all the old misunderstandings behind us." I looked at the gold resting on the fraudulent contract. I did not reach for it. I picked up my linen napkin, wiped my mouth, and placed it neatly beside my plate. I reviewed the contract. I said, my voice quiet and even. "However, as is customary in my profession, I never sign legal instruments without conducting a routine logistical audit on the underlying assets." Missouri is a pragmatic state. We require proof of origin. I reached down to the floor and lifted my pristine leather briefcase onto my lap. The brass locks opened with two sharp metallic clicks that echoed loudly in the small enclosed room. I reached inside and withdrew the three bound presentation folders I had prepared the night before. I slid the first folder across the table to my father. I slid the second folder to my mother. I slid the third folder down the length of the white linen, stopping mere inches from Brent's gold pen. Brent looked down at the matte plastic cover. The arrogant, relaxed smile evaporated from his face instantly. The muscles in his jaw tightened as his eyes scanned the bold text printed on the adhesive label: Asset Trace and Fraudulent Zoning Analysis. "What is this?" Thomas asked, picking up his folder with a confused frown. "That is the reality of your son's agricultural venture," I stated, keeping my hands folded on the table. "Open it." The sound of heavy paper turning filled the room. Thomas flipped to the first page. Linda followed suit. I watched my parents look at the printed county tax records showing the lease payments on Brent's luxury apartment in Kansas City. I watched them turn the page to find the shell company registrations outlining his commercial real estate development group. I watched them stare at the bank statements clearly tracing the funds from the predatory private equity loan directly into his personal checking account. The private dining room went dead silent. The faint clinking of silverware from the main restaurant outside felt miles away. The air in the room grew heavy and unyielding. Thomas turned to the final tab, revealing the municipal zoning petition to pave over the Campbell Farm for a warehouse district. At the bottom of the page sat the forged environmental impact waivers, featuring the jagged and looping signatures Brent had traced to bypass their consent. My father stopped breathing. My mother's hands began to shake, the thick paper trembling between her fingers. They were looking at 10 years of systematic theft, bound, indexed, and undeniable. Brent did not open his folder. He stared across the table at me, his face pale. The charming entrepreneur facade stripped away to reveal the cornered thief underneath. The silence in the private dining room stretched into a dense, suffocating weight. The faint clinking of silverware from the main restaurant outside felt miles away, separated by thick mahogany doors and heavy velvet curtains. I watched my parents process the contents of the folders. I expected the natural human reaction to overwhelming betrayal. I anticipated shock followed by a slow, horrifying realization that their golden son had spent a decade stealing their retirement and forging their signatures. In the logistics industry, we rely on a concept called the sunk cost fallacy. It dictates that people will often continue pouring resources into a failing endeavor, simply because they have already invested too much to turn back. I was about to learn that this principle applies to parenting just as ruthlessly as it applies to corporate finance. My mother was the first to break the quiet. She did not turn to Brent and demand an explanation. She did not point to the bank transfers or the forged environmental waivers. Instead, she pushed the plastic folder away from her, her hands trembling as she looked across the white linen tablecloth at me. Tears began to well in her eyes, spilling over her mascara. But this was not the weeping of a victim who had just discovered a crime. This was the indignant defensive crying of a woman whose preferred reality had been threatened. "How could you do this, Nora?" Linda asked, her voice cracking with manufactured anguish. "How could you hire investigators and snoop through your own brother's private life? We came to you for help, and you spent your time digging up dirt to humiliate him." I sat perfectly still. I did not blink. She was staring at undeniable documented proof of elder abuse and wire fraud, and she chose to frame the situation as a breach of sibling etiquette. "I did not hire investigators, Mom," I said, keeping my tone instructional and flat. "Every document in that folder is a matter of public record. You can find them on the county assessor portal. Brent forged your signatures on a municipal zoning petition to sell the farm to a warehouse developer." "You are just jealous," she sobbed, dabbing her eyes with a linen napkin. "You have always been jealous of his ambition. You sit in your quiet little house in the middle of nowhere, and you cannot stand the fact that he is trying to build something significant." Before I could address the staggering cognitive dissonance of her statement, my father acted. Thomas reached out and slammed his folder shut. The sharp smack of the heavy plastic cover hitting the table echoed loudly in the small room. He pressed his palms flat against the cover, as if trying to physically trap the truth inside the binding. Your mother is right, Thomas said, his voice dropping into a harsh authoritarian register. Family matters should not be treated like a corporate audit, Nora. You do not bring spreadsheets and background checks to a dinner table. Brent is navigating a very complex business environment. Startups require creative financing. You do not understand the pressure he is under to modernize our legacy. I looked at my father. I thought about the decades he spent demanding to see my report cards, my bank statements, and my scholarship letters before he would offer a single word of praise. He had always required receipts from me. Now presented with a neatly bound portfolio of his son's felonies, he decided that auditing was a moral failing. Dad, he is not modernizing the farm, I stated, speaking slowly, so the words could not be misinterpreted. He is rezoning it for commercial use, so he can pave over the topsoil. He is using a predatory loan to pay for a luxury apartment in Kansas City. When the loan defaults, the private equity firm will take the land. There is no business. These are just draft documents, Thomas interrupted, refusing to look at the folder under his hands. You are deliberately misinterpreting his strategy. He is working with developers to secure the collateral. He told us he had a plan and we trust him. You have no right to interrogate him like a hostile witness. Seeing his parents rush to construct a shield around him, the blood returned to Brent's face. The panic that had seized him only moments ago vanished. He realized he did not have to defend himself against the evidence. His parents were doing the work for him. The cornered thief disappeared, replaced instantly by the arrogant golden child. Brent leaned back in his leather chair, unbuttoning his suit jacket to project a relaxed, untouchable posture. He picked up his espresso cup, took a slow sip, and set it down with a deliberate clink on the saucer. A smirk crept across his face. You really went out of your way for this presentation, sis, Brent sneered, shaking his head in mock pity. I have to admit, it is impressive in a sad, obsessive kind of way. You spent hours printing public records to invent a conspiracy theory because you cannot handle the fact that Mom and Dad trusted me with the estate instead of you. He leaned forward, placing his elbows on the table, narrowing his eyes. Is this what this is really about? Brent asked, his tone dripping with condescension. Are you really bringing all this fake outrage because we missed your birthday dinner 12 years ago? You have been sitting in the middle of Missouri for over a decade, nursing a grudge over a piece of chicken. You are a bitter, lonely woman, Nora. You have no husband, no children, and no life outside of your supply chain spreadsheets. You are trying to destroy my venture because you have nothing of your own to celebrate. I sat in the corner seat and listened to his monologue. I did not raise my voice to defend my life. I did not list my achievements, my robust retirement accounts, or the deep respect I commanded in my industry. I did not try to convince my parents that my brother was lying. I experienced a profound, crystalline moment of clarity. For 12 years, a small, quiet part of my subconscious had wondered if my parents would eventually wake up. I had wondered if a day would come when Brent pushed them too far, causing the illusion to shatter and forcing them to finally recognize my value. I realized in that private dining room that such a day would never arrive. They would rather be driven into abject poverty by a comfortable lie than saved by an uncomfortable truth. They were willing to lose their ancestral land, their savings, and their dignity, so long as they did not have to admit their golden child was a fraud. They needed Brent to be a visionary entrepreneur because it validated their endless sacrifices. They needed me to be a jealous, bitter spinster because it validated their neglect. I could not save them because they viewed the rescue as an attack. I nodded slowly, acknowledging the reality of the situation. I reached for my reading glasses, folded the frames with a soft click, and slipped them into my blazer pocket. I picked up my pristine leather briefcase and placed it on the table. I snapped the brass locks open, placed my own copy of the audit inside, and secured the clasps. I pushed my chair back and stood up. The air conditioning hummed above us, cool and indifferent. You are entirely correct, Thomas, I said, looking down at my father. I do not understand the pressure he is under, and I will not be participating in his creative financing. I decline to sign the guarantor agreement. You are on your own. You are walking away from your family, Linda cried out, her voice echoing in the confined space. You are going to let the bank take the farm out of pure spite. I am not walking away from anything, I replied, smoothing the front of my jacket. I am establishing a boundary. What you choose to do with the land is your burden. I turned toward the door, taking 2 steps before pausing. I looked back over my shoulder, focusing my gaze entirely on my brother. His smirk was still plastered across his face, confident that he had won the psychological battle. He believed he had successfully neutralized the threat by turning our parents against me. Oh, and Brent, I said, keeping my voice as mild as if I were confirming a shipping schedule. I did not bring this audit here to convince Thomas and Linda. I brought it as a professional courtesy to you. I have already couriered the bound packets along with the proof of forged signatures to the county zoning board via certified mail. The smirk on his face froze. The Municipal Planning Commission meets on Monday morning at 9 o'clock. I continued, watching the geometry of his features change. They have 48 hours to review the asset trace before they vote on your commercial rezoning petition. I imagine the developers you promised clean title to will be very interested in the public record. The color drained from Brent's face with astonishing speed. The arrogant posture collapsed. He stared at me, his mouth slightly open, the realization of his legal peril finally piercing his delusion. He knew that Thomas and Linda could be manipulated with tears and anger. He also knew that a county zoning board and a predatory private equity firm only cared about the math. I turned the brass knob, opened the heavy mahogany door, and walked out of the private dining room, leaving them alone with the paperwork. I drove away from the upscale steakhouse in total silence. The evening rain had stopped, leaving the asphalt slick and reflective under the streetlights. I did not turn on the radio. I let the rhythmic hum of the tires against the wet pavement fill the cabin of my car. I did not check my smartphone until the following morning. When I finally unlocked the screen at my kitchen counter, the notification icons confirmed exactly what I had anticipated. Panic is a predictable metric. When you dismantle a con artist's primary illusion, they do not retreat and reflect on their actions. They attack the credibility of the person holding the mirror. Brent left his first voicemail at 2 in the morning. His voice was slurred, thick with cheap scotch and genuine terror. The confident entrepreneur who ordered prime rib only hours earlier was gone. In his place was a frantic, cornered man, realizing his lucrative warehouse deal was resting on a crumbling precipice. He could no longer rely on his charm to smooth over the inconsistencies in his paperwork. "You think you can play me, Nora?" Brent shouted into the receiver, his tone erratic and unhinged. "You are sick. You need psychiatric help. You are trying to sabotage my life because you have never accomplished anything real. I am calling your boss. I am going to tell them you are unstable. You are going to lose everything." The calls did not stop there. By Monday morning, Brent had weaponized our mother. Linda left a tearful, wavering message on my personal cell phone. She did not mention the forged signatures on the environmental impact reports. She did not mention the predatory private equity loan. She deployed the exact same emotional blackmail she used during my childhood whenever I pushed back against the family dynamic. She attempted to make me responsible for the physical well-being of the adults who had abandoned me. "Nora, please," Linda sobbed into the voicemail. "Your father is having chest pains. His blood pressure is through the roof. You are killing him with this vendetta. Just withdraw the packet from the zoning board and we can fix this as a family. Drop this before Dad has a heart attack." Years ago, a message like that would have paralyzed me. I would have abandoned my own boundaries to ensure my father remained healthy. I would have absorbed their panic and let them reset the board. But a logistician learns to separate the signal from the noise. The chest pains were a fabrication designed to force compliance. I felt a brief phantom tightening in my own chest out of sheer conditioning, but I let it pass. I did not return the call. Instead, I downloaded the audio files of Brent's unhinged voicemails. I placed them on an encrypted flash drive. I arrived at my corporate office an hour before my scheduled shift and walked directly to the legal compliance department. I sat down with our general counsel, a pragmatic woman named Sarah, who handled corporate risk mitigation. I plugged the flash drive into her computer and played the recordings. I laid out the facts without emotion. I explained that an estranged relative was involved in a municipal zoning dispute and was attempting to use my workplace as leverage for harassment. I requested a formal trespass order for the building and a documented human resources file noting the personal nature of the calls. Sarah nodded, her expression professional and severe. She understood the assignment. She drafted the internal security memos within 10 minutes. My career is my sanctuary. It is the fortress I built brick by brick after fleeing St. Louis 12 years ago. I refused to let Brent drag his chaotic mud onto my polished floors. By the time I returned to my desk, my professional perimeter was secured by corporate lawyers who eat empty threats for breakfast. With my defensive line established, I shifted to offense. Brent believed he held the ultimate trump card because Horizon Holdings possessed the primary lien on the Campbell farm. He thought the threat of imminent foreclosure would force me to capitulate and sign the restructuring agreement. He did not realize that I had spent the weekend digging deeper into the county registry with Harlan Vance. During our research on Saturday afternoon, Harlan discovered a vital structural flaw in Brent's scheme. Decades ago, my grandfather had taken out a modest agricultural improvement loan to build a new grain silo on the southern acreage. That secondary lien was small, practically forgotten, and held by a quiet regional bank in our hometown. However, Missouri property law dictates that secondary lien holders possess specific rights to cure defaults on primary notes to protect their investment. I met Harlan at his office on Saturday. The room smelled of old leather and legal volumes. I brought a cashier's check drawn from the high-yield savings account I had cultivated for over a decade. I did not buy luxury sports cars or lease penthouses in Kansas City. I used my hard-earned savings to purchase leverage. Harlan formed a proxy holding company on my behalf. The entity was named with random alphanumeric characters, obscuring my identity entirely. Through this proxy, I purchased the secondary lien on the Campbell farm directly from the regional bank. The transaction was clean, quiet, and legally binding. The paperwork was filed with the county clerk before the weekend ended. I now held a vested legal interest in the ancestral land. If Horizon Holdings attempted to foreclose on my parents, my proxy company possessed the statutory right to block the seizure by curing the default. More importantly, Brent could not sell the property to his commercial warehouse developer without clearing my lien first. The developers required a pristine title insurance policy. They could not break ground until every encumbrance was resolved. Brent thought he controlled the board because he manipulated our parents. He did not realize I now owned the table. The rest of the weekend passed with agonizing slowness. I focused on the physical routines that ground me. I ironed my sharpest navy suit, feeling the crisp heat of the iron against the wool fabric. I organized a fresh set of presentation folders for the Municipal Planning Commission. I polished my shoes until they gleamed. The quiet order of my house was a stark contrast to the frantic digital warfare Brent was waging on my phone. By Sunday evening, the reality of the situation began to crush him. He could not access my office. He could not manipulate me through our parents. The zoning board meeting was scheduled for the following morning, and he knew the commissioners would be reviewing the exact financial trace I had provided via certified mail. His window for escape was closing rapidly. At 9 o'clock on Sunday night, my phone screen illuminated one final time. It was a text message from Brent. There was no fake affection. There was no frantic yelling. There was only a cold, desperate ultimatum from a man watching his fraudulent empire crumble into dust. If you show up to that meeting, you are dead to this family. I read the words in the quiet of my living room. I felt the phantom weight of my 30th birthday dinner, the years of silent exile, the endless prioritization of a son who offered our parents nothing but ruin. He was using the threat of banishment as his final weapon, unaware that I had already built a thriving life in exile. I looked at the pristine briefcase resting by my front door, holding the documents that would finally end the cycle. I did not block his number. I wanted him to see the delivery confirmation. I opened the keypad and typed my response. I hit send, turned off the lamp, and listened to the steady rain falling against the glass. Received. The 48 hours leading up to a municipal zoning hearing feel distinctly different from a typical weekend. Time alters its pace. The hours stretch and every minute becomes a meticulous inventory check. I woke up early on Sunday morning, the final day of preparation. The rain from the previous night had moved east, leaving the Missouri sky a bruised, brittle gray. I brewed a pot of black coffee, poured it into an insulated travel mug, and stepped out onto my back porch. I had one highly personal errand to run before the professional mechanics consumed the remainder of my day. I drove my car out to the old county cemetery, navigating the winding rural routes that bordered the edges of the Campbell farm. The soil here is dark and dense, the kind of earth that yields fortunes if you treat the dirt with respect and ruin if you try to cheat it. I parked near the rusted wrought iron gates and walked through the damp grass toward a polished granite headstone in the far corner of the lot. My grandmother, Clara Campbell, rested beneath a thick blanket of fallen oak leaves. Clara was a formidable, intelligent woman who spent her entire adulthood keeping the peace at the expense of her own sanity. She balanced the farm's ledgers by hand at the kitchen table, raised 4 children, and quietly absorbed the erratic behavior of a husband who often drank away the harvest profits. She never raised her voice. She never corrected him in public. She modeled a very specific type of Midwestern endurance, passing it down to my mother, who then eagerly attempted to pass it down to me. The women in my bloodline were trained from birth to function as emotional shock absorbers, shielding the men from the natural consequences of their own reckless choices. I stood over her grave, feeling the crisp autumn wind bite through my wool coat. I reached down and placed a single white stone on the top of the granite marker. It was a gesture of respect, but it also served as a formal resignation letter. I refused to inherit her silence. The generational habit of metabolizing toxic behavior to protect a fragile patriarchal ego was ending with me. I turned my back on the cemetery, walked to my car, and drove home to finalize my strategy. While I was organizing my evidence binders at my dining room table, the local rumor mill was operating at peak efficiency. In a tight-knit agricultural community, gossip travels significantly faster than a combine harvester. Brent was actively campaigning to secure his narrative. He spent his weekend cornering municipal board members at local diners, hardware stores, and church parking lots, weaving a fictitious and highly compelling story. He claimed he was on the verge of closing a lucrative commercial development deal that would bring hundreds of union jobs to our county. In his revised version of the truth, the only obstacle standing between the town and economic prosperity was a disgruntled, estranged sister who wanted to sabotage the local economy out of sheer spite. His propaganda campaign yielded measurable results by Sunday afternoon. My cell phone rang, displaying the caller ID of Shirley Higgins, a lifelong neighbor whose property bordered ours and my mother's closest confidant. I answered the call, knowing exactly what script she had been handed to read. "Nora, dear, your mother is just beside herself." Shirley began, her tone dripping with unearned familiarity and dripping with condescension. Brent explained the whole situation to us after the morning service. He is trying to secure the family legacy. This warehouse project is going to secure your parents' retirement, and it will be a boon for the whole town. You know how volatile the soybean markets are right now. We all think you should step back, calm down, and let the boys handle the business side of things. I listened to the casual sexism, the blind allegiance to a charismatic liar, and the underlying pressure to conform. Shirley meant well, but ignorance coupled with good intentions forms a highly dangerous combination. She wanted me to surrender my leverage to maintain the social equilibrium of our hometown. "Shirley," I said, keeping my tone perfectly pleasant but unyielding, utilizing the voice I reserve for hostile freight negotiations. "I appreciate your concern for my parents' retirement fund. However, my brother is currently under active investigation for forging their signatures on federal environmental impact waivers and municipal zoning petitions. I strongly suggest you refrain from offering financial advice regarding a multi-million-dollar felony." I disconnected the call before she could formulate a response, leaving her to process the legal vocabulary. I did not have the time or the inclination to educate the peanut gallery. I turned my attention back to the dining room table. I needed a sequence of events so airtight that Brent could not slip through a procedural loophole. I compiled 3 final definitive packets for the zoning commissioners. Each binder contained the original chain of title, the fraudulent private equity loan terms, the forged municipal waivers, and the stamped legal proof of my proxy LLC holding the secondary lien. I tabbed every discrepancy with red flags. It was a masterpiece of forensic logistics. However, presenting evidence to a panel of local politicians carries an inherent risk. Politicians can be swayed by the promise of corporate tax revenue, and Brent had promised them a commercial windfall. If the board chose to look the other way to secure the warehouse development, my paperwork would be buried in committee. I needed a neutral, objective witness in the room to ensure the board acted on the documentation rather than the rhetoric. I opened my laptop and composed an email to David Finch, a senior investigative reporter for a prominent regional agricultural business journal. David specialized in exposing predatory land grabs, targeting legacy farms in the Midwest. I did not provide him with the full dossier. In logistics, you never show the manifest until the cargo is on the dock. You give them just enough bait to guarantee their attendance. I sent David a concise summary detailing a shell company attempting to rezone prime agricultural acreage using unauthorized collateral and forged owner consent forms. I included the time and location of the municipal hearing. David replied within 14 minutes. He confirmed he would be sitting in the back row with a photographer. The trap was now publicly documented. The board would be forced to follow the letter of the law with the press watching their every move. Monday morning arrived with a clear, sharp dawn. The sky was an unforgiving bright blue. I stepped into my kitchen and began the final preparations. In the military, soldiers inspect their gear before stepping onto a battlefield. In the corporate world, we iron our clothes. I laid a charcoal gray suit across the ironing board. I pressed the fabric with slow, deliberate strokes, letting the steady hiss of the steam calm my nervous system. I polished my leather pumps until the scuffs disappeared. I packed my briefcase, ensuring the brass clasps were securely fastened. I was not dressing for a family reunion. I was dressing for an execution. I drove to the county municipal building, a sturdy limestone structure situated in the center of the town square. The parking lot was overflowing, a clear indicator that Brent's aggressive lobbying and Shirley's gossip network had drawn a substantial crowd. People wanted to see the drama unfold. I parked my car, gripped the handle of my briefcase, and walked toward the heavy glass doors with my head held high. The interior of the building buzzed with the low, resonant murmur of local farmers, developers, and town gossips. I navigated the crowded hallway and pushed open the heavy wooden double doors to the main assembly room. The space was brightly lit, lined with varnished wooden pews, facing an elevated mahogany dais, where the 5 zoning commissioners sat reviewing their dockets. I walked down the center aisle. The murmuring ceased instantly, replaced by a tense, heavy silence, as the townspeople recognized me. I felt the weight of their collective gaze, but I kept my eyes fixed straight ahead, my posture impeccable, projecting the quiet authority of a woman who knows exactly what she holds in her hands. I reached the front row directly behind the speaker's podium. Sitting there, bathed in the harsh fluorescent light, were Thomas, Linda, and Brent. My brother wore a tailored navy suit, his arms crossed confidently over his chest, projecting a facade of relaxed, untouchable authority. My parents flanked him like loyal bodyguards, sitting rigidly in their Sunday best. They looked up as I approached the row. Their eyes were hard, glaring at me with a toxic mixture of fear and defiance. They expected me to flinch. They expected me to turn around, walk out the door, and surrender to the crushing weight of their disapproval. I did not flinch. I took the empty seat directly across the aisle from them, placed my leather briefcase on my lap, and waited for the chairman to strike the gavel. The sharp crack of a wooden gavel echoed through the assembly hall, slicing through the low murmur of the crowd. Chairman Robert Hayes, a stern man who had served on the Municipal Planning Commission for 2 decades, called the morning session to order. The room was filled to capacity. Local farmers in denim jackets sat shoulder to shoulder with commercial real estate developers in sharp suits. In the back row, I spotted David Finch, the investigative reporter, sitting with a notebook resting on his knee. The air in the room felt thick, smelling of damp wool coats, stale coffee, and intense civic anticipation. Chairman Hayes read the docket number, officially announcing the petition to rezone the southern 50 acres of the Campbell parcel from agricultural to heavy commercial use. He invited the petitioner to the podium. Brent stood up from the front row. He buttoned his tailored navy jacket and walked toward the microphone with the effortless grace of a man who believes he owns the building. He adjusted the microphone stand, offering a bright, winning smile to the 5 commissioners seated on the elevated mahogany dais. He did not look nervous, he looked triumphant. For the next 10 minutes, Brent delivered a masterclass in manipulative storytelling. He painted a tragic portrait of a struggling Midwestern family farm, burdened by fluctuating crop prices and outdated machinery. He positioned himself as the dutiful visionary son, stepping in to save his parents from financial ruin. He described his proposed warehouse distribution center as an economic miracle for the county, promising new tax revenues and hundreds of reliable jobs. He spoke smoothly, using broad aspirational language that sounded profound but contained zero actual data. "We love our land," Brent concluded, placing a hand over his heart in a gesture of practiced sincerity. "But progress requires sacrifice. We are ready to modernize our legacy. I know that change is difficult for some people. There are always disgruntled family members who prefer to live in the past and derail progress because they do not understand the future. But my parents and I are looking forward, and we ask this board to support our vision." He stepped away from the podium to a smattering of polite applause from the developer contingent in the audience. Thomas and Linda beamed at him as he returned to his seat. They looked radiant, thoroughly enchanted by the fiction he had just spun. They truly believed he was their savior. Chairman Hayes adjusted his reading glasses and looked out at the audience. He asked if there was anyone present who wished to speak in opposition to the petition. I stood up. The wooden pew creaked slightly beneath me. I gripped the handle of my leather briefcase and walked down the center aisle toward the podium. I did not rush. I maintained a steady, measured pace, the same pace I use when walking onto a chaotic loading dock to halt a defective shipment. The room grew exceptionally quiet. Brent shifted in his seat, his confident smile faltering slightly as he realized I had not been intimidated by his Sunday night ultimatum. I reached the podium. I did not adjust the microphone. I placed my briefcase on the sturdy wooden stand and unfastened the brass locks. The sharp metallic clicks resonated through the silent hall. I withdrew 5 identical bound presentation folders. I stepped to the side and handed the stack to the municipal clerk, requesting that she distribute one to each of the seated commissioners. I waited until every board member had a folder resting in front of them. Then I turned back to the microphone. "My name is Nora Campbell." I began, my voice projecting clearly across the room. It was a flat, authoritative tone, void of sorrow or anger. It was the tone of a logistics director diagnosing a critical supply chain failure. "I am a vested party in the Campbell property, and I am here to formally oppose this rezoning petition." I paused, letting my gaze sweep across the dais. "My brother just delivered a very moving speech about progress and legacy," I continued. "However, Missouri is known as the show-me state. We do not govern based on sentiment. We govern based on evidence. So let us look at what is actually being shown here today." I direct the board's attention to tab 1. The sound of heavy paper turning echoed from the elevated platform. Under tab 1, you will find the environmental impact waivers and the primary owner consent forms required by county statute for commercial rezoning, I explained. Those forms require the signatures of the primary deed holders, Thomas and Linda Campbell. If you examine the signature lines, you will note severe irregularities in the pen pressure and looping structures. I spent my early 20s verifying freight manifests on a loading dock, catching drivers who tried to forge weight tickets. I know what a traced signature looks like. Those signatures are fraudulent. The primary deed holders did not sign those municipal documents. A low murmur rippled through the audience. Chairman Hayes leaned forward, studying the page intently. Thomas and Linda exchanged a frantic, confused glance in the front row. "If you turn to tab 2, you will see the financial architecture of this petition," I said, keeping the pace relentless and methodical. "The petitioner claims this rezoning will save a struggling family farm. The documentation proves otherwise. The petitioner pledged the agricultural deed as collateral to a private equity firm in Delaware named Horizon Holdings. This loan structure violates several county agricultural preservation statutes by utilizing predatory, compounding interest rates designed to force a default. I watched the commissioners flip the pages, tracing the highlighted sections with their pens. Furthermore, I stated, raising my voice just enough to cut through the growing tension in the room, the funds disbursed by Horizon Holdings were not used for agricultural modernization. I have provided the bank routing numbers and the corresponding lease agreements. The capital extracted from my family's land was transferred directly to a personal checking account and used to lease a luxury apartment in Kansas City. There is no business plan. There is only a shell company designed to secure a zoning change, flip the land to a warehouse developer, and leave the original property owners holding a toxic defaulting note. The assembly hall erupted into shocked whispers. The local farmers in the audience began muttering angrily, recognizing a predatory land grab. Brent could no longer maintain his composure. The charismatic facade shattered into pieces. He sprang up from his seat in the front row, his face flushed a deep, panicked red. "She is lying," Brent shouted, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Those documents are fabricated. She has been estranged from this family for 12 years. She is a bitter, vindictive woman, trying to ruin my reputation because she is jealous of my success. Do not listen to her." Chairman Hayes grabbed his wooden gavel and struck the sounding block with tremendous force. "Order!" The chairman bellowed, his voice echoing fiercely through the microphones. "Mr. Campbell, you had your allotted time to speak. You will sit down and remain silent, or I will have the bailiff remove you from these chambers immediately." Brent froze. He looked at the uniformed bailiff standing near the exit, then slowly sank back into his seat. He was sweating visibly, the moisture gleaming on his forehead under the bright lights. Thomas and Linda sat paralyzed beside him, staring at the projected evidence on the monitors, their illusions disintegrating in front of a live audience. "Ms. Campbell, you may proceed," Chairman Hayes said, adjusting his glasses and looking down at me with profound seriousness. "Do you have further evidence regarding the title encumbrance?" "I do, Mr. Chairman," I replied, never taking my eyes off the board. "Please turn to the final tab in your folders." The commissioners turned to the last page. The petitioner promised a clean title to the prospective warehouse developers. I explained, delivering the final fatal blow to his scheme. However, a clean title is a legal impossibility. Decades ago, a secondary lien was placed on the southern acreage for a grain silo improvement. 48 hours ago, a proxy holding company purchased that secondary lien from the regional bank. I am the sole managing director of that proxy company. I legally control the secondary encumbrance on the Campbell farm. I let the weight of that statement settle over the room. Brent's mouth fell open. He stared at me in horror, realizing that the quiet sister he thought he had outsmarted had quietly purchased the lock to his cage. Under Missouri property law, I concluded, my voice ringing with absolute finality, no commercial rezoning permit can be granted, and no title can be transferred without the explicit notarized consent of all lien holders. I do not consent. The petitioner has no legal authority to sell this land, and this board has no legal standing to approve a zoning change on an encumbered title. I closed my empty briefcase and snapped the locks shut. The silence in the municipal building was absolute. Brent's entire house of cards had collapsed in real time. The carefully constructed lies, the forged documents, the predatory loans, and the years of unchecked arrogance were reduced to a pile of highlighted paper on a mahogany desk. The audit was complete, the math was verified, and the truth had finally shown its receipts. Chairman Robert Hayes let the silence stretch for a long, heavy moment. He looked down at the comprehensive folders resting on the mahogany dais, running his hands over the tabbed pages. He turned his head slowly to the left, catching the eye of the municipal attorney seated at the end of the elevated platform. The attorney offered a single grim nod. The evidence was irrefutable, and the legal implications were severe. Chairman Hayes picked up his wooden gavel. He did not pound it in a show of anger. He brought it down with a firm, decisive strike that finalized the ruin of Brent Campbell. The sharp crack echoed across the silent room, signaling the end of an illusion. "This board hereby denies the petition for commercial rezoning on the Campbell parcel," Chairman Hayes announced, his voice projecting through the public address system with stern authority. Furthermore, given the documented evidence of forged municipal documents and potential financial exploitation presented here today, I am instructing the municipal clerk to forward this entire packet to the county prosecutor for immediate review. We do not tolerate fraud in this jurisdiction, nor do we abide the exploitation of our agricultural legacy. This session is adjourned. The microphones clicked off, but the overhead projector remained illuminated. It cast a harsh, bright light onto the large white screen situated directly behind the podium. The image displayed was page 7 of my audit. It was a blown-up copy of Brent's bank ledger, highlighting the direct routing of the predatory loan funds from the private equity firm in Delaware to his personal accounts. Thomas and Linda sat paralyzed in the front pew. They were forced to look at the undeniable mathematics of their son's life, projected in bright white and stark black ink for the entire town to see. The screen showed clear, itemized transactions. There was a $10,000 down payment for a luxury imported vehicle. There were repeated high-dollar transfers to a riverboat casino account. There was a security deposit for a high-rise apartment in the city center. Every single dollar had been extracted from the soil their ancestors had cultivated with their own hands. I watched my father stare at the projector screen. His mouth opened and closed silently, struggling to form words that refused to come. For decades, Thomas had chosen to view Brent through a lens of infinite potential. He had excused the failed ventures, the sudden debts, and the chaotic choices by telling himself that his son was simply a misunderstood visionary waiting for his big break. That lifelong illusion was now dead murdered by cold bank routing numbers and time-stamped transfers. Thomas raised a trembling hand to his chest, gripping the fabric of his suit jacket right over his heart. His breathing grew shallow and rapid. I was overwhelmed by the sudden crushing realization that he had handed his family legacy to a thief, and he had actively pushed away the daughter who tried to warn him. The commercial developers who had occupied the middle rows of the hall were already standing up. They were buttoning their expensive coats and walking briskly toward the exits. They recognized a toxic asset when they saw one, and they wanted to distance themselves from the impending criminal investigation as quickly as possible. Brent saw his wealthy investors walking away. He saw the doors to his affluent, easy future slamming shut, replaced by the very real prospect of a federal indictment. He did not turn to his parents to apologize. He did not fall to his knees, express remorse, or beg for their forgiveness. A cornered predator does not seek redemption. It seeks a target to blame for its own failure. Brent spun around to face Thomas and Linda. His charismatic entrepreneurial smile was gone, replaced by a contorted, vicious scowl. "Do you see what she did?" Brent shouted, pointing a shaking finger at me before turning his wrath fully onto our parents. "She ruined the deal, and you just sat there and let her do it. You let her walk in here and destroy everything I built. You are pathetic." Thomas looked at his son, his eyes filled with a terrifying mixture of profound sorrow and dawning horror. "You forged our names, Brent," Thomas whispered, his voice cracking under the weight of the betrayal. "You tried to steal the farm to pay for a sports car and a penthouse. You lied to us about everything." "I had to lie to you," Brent screamed, his voice echoing fiercely in the emptying hall. The remaining townspeople stopped in the aisles, watching the ugly spectacle unfold with wide eyes. "You are archaic," Brent continued, pacing in front of the wooden pew. "You are holding on to a useless patch of dirt while I am trying to build something real. You never gave me enough money to get my ventures off the ground. If you had just co-signed the commercial notes years ago, I would not have needed to find outside capital. This is your fault. You forced me to do this because you are cheap, small-minded, and terrified of progress." He stood in the center of the municipal building and verbally eviscerated the two people who had sacrificed their entire financial security for his comfort. He called them foolish. He mocked their rural lifestyle. He exposed his deep, abiding contempt for their intellect. He revealed to the entire room that he had never respected them. He had only ever viewed them as an automated teller machine waiting to be drained of its resources. The local farmers and business owners watched the scene with profound disgust. In Missouri, we value hard work and familial loyalty above almost all else. Watching a grown man berate the parents he had just defrauded violated every cultural norm of the community. Brent was cementing his status as a social pariah in real time, digging his own grave with every word he shouted. Linda could not process the venom pouring from her favorite child. Her mind rejected the reality of his hatred. She could not fix him. She could not soothe his anger with a blank check or a comforting lie. The situation had escalated far beyond her capacity to manage. She reverted to her most ingrained habit. She looked for the administrative daughter to manage the crisis. Linda scrambled out of the wooden pew and rushed across the center aisle. She reached out with trembling hands and grabbed the sleeve of my charcoal suit. Her face was streaked with tears, her carefully applied makeup smeared across her cheeks, leaving dark, jagged lines. "Nora, please," Linda sobbed, her voice high and desperate, echoing in the cavernous room. "You have to stop this. You heard the chairman. They are going to send your brother to jail. You own the secondary lien now. You control the property. You have the money. Just pay off the private equity firm and clear the title. We can drop the forgery charges. We can fix this quietly before it ruins his life. Please, Nora, save him." I looked down at the hands clutching my jacket sleeve. 12 years ago, she had called me with this exact tone of voice. She had told me to cancel my 30th birthday dinner because Brent needed rescuing from an eviction. She had abandoned me for over a decade, allowing me to believe I was entirely disposable, only returning when the math no longer worked in her favor. Now, standing in front of dozens of witnesses, she was begging me to sacrifice my hard-earned financial security to shield the brother who had just confessed to despising them both. She was asking me to set myself on fire to keep her illusion warm. I did not raise my voice. I did not pull my arm away quickly or cause a physical scene. I reached down and gently but firmly detached her fingers from my jacket. I smoothed the wool fabric where she had wrinkled it. I looked directly into her frantic, weeping eyes, feeling the cold, unshakable calm of a logistics director who has successfully rerouted a hazardous shipment. "I fixed the farm's title," I said, my voice carrying clearly in the quiet hall, ensuring the words registered with undeniable permanence. "I am not fixing your son." I turned my back on the chaos. I picked up my pristine leather briefcase, feeling the solid, reassuring weight of the brass handle in my grip. I walked down the center aisle, my heels clicking a steady, even rhythm on the polished hardwood floor. I did not look back at my father, who was still clutching his chest, staring into the void of his own mistakes. I did not look back at my brother, who was pacing furiously like a trapped animal, shouting at the backs of retreating developers. I pushed open the heavy wooden double doors of the municipal building and stepped outside. The cool, crisp Missouri autumn air hit my face, carrying the faint scent of dry leaves and distant rain. I breathed in deeply, savoring the clean, quiet atmosphere of my own unshakable peace. The county prosecutor did not waste time. In Missouri, forging municipal documents and attempting to defraud local planning commissions carry heavy statutory penalties. The justice system moves with a steady, grinding efficiency when clear evidence is presented on a silver platter. Brent was formally indicted for wire fraud and felony forgery within 14 days of the public zoning hearing. The swift nature of his downfall was a direct result of the immaculate paper trail I had provided. The predatory private equity firm, Horizon Holdings, quickly realized their collateral was compromised. Their legal department recognized the toxic nature of the forged signatures and the failed rezoning effort. They pivoted their extraction strategy to minimize their exposure. They called the note due immediately and foreclosed on every personal asset Brent possessed. His sleek European sports car was repossessed from a grocery store parking lot in broad daylight. His luxury penthouse lease was terminated, and his accounts were frozen pending the federal investigation. He declared bankruptcy before the month ended, trading his tailored suits for a court-appointed public defender. His loud, chaotic existence was reduced to a stack of sterile legal filings in a municipal courthouse. The local rumor mill experienced a rapid and profound recalibration. The agricultural community that had previously praised Brent as a visionary entrepreneur now viewed him as a predatory grifter. The farmers who drank coffee at the downtown diner no longer spoke his name with admiration. They spoke of him with quiet disgust, repulsed by a man who would try to pave over a century of prime topsoil for a quick payout. Conversely, my professional reputation solidified into something untouchable. In the supply chain logistics sector, managing a high-stakes crisis with cold empirical precision is the highest form of currency. My colleagues, competitors, and the local business community recognized that I had diagnosed and dismantled a complex financial crime without ever raising my voice. My corporate fortress grew stronger. I returned to tracking freight margins and barge schedules, unbothered by the wreckage left in my wake. The final piece of logistical cleanup required addressing Thomas and Linda. I arranged a meeting at the law office of my mentor, Harlan Vance. I did not invite them to my home. I did not offer to meet them at a restaurant. I scheduled a rigid 30-minute appointment in a professional setting, ensuring the environment remained strictly transactional. When I walked into the mahogany conference room, my parents were already seated at the polished table. Harlan sat quietly in the corner chair observing the proceedings, as a neutral legal witness. The physical toll of the past month on my parents was staggering. Thomas looked hollowed out. His posture was folded inward, his hands resting limply on his knees. The fabric of his shirt hung loosely around his collar. Linda stared at the blank legal pad in front of her, her face devoid of the practiced dramatic panic she used to employ. They were broken. Their retirement savings were gone, swallowed by Brent's cascading debt and subsequent legal fees. They had been forced to vacate their home and downsize into a cramped rented apartment on the edge of town. They looked up when I entered. A faint, desperate glimmer of hope flickered in my mother's eyes. They still harbored a fundamental misunderstanding of the situation. Because I had purchased the secondary lien through my proxy holding company, I now legally controlled the debt on the Campbell farm. Thomas and Linda assumed this meant I had saved the property for the family. They expected me to hand them the keys, forgive their decades of neglect, and allow them to move back onto the ancestral soil. They believed the administrative daughter had simply reorganized the paperwork to facilitate their comfort. I took my seat across the table. I did not ask how they were holding up. I opened my leather briefcase and withdrew a single-bound legal document. I slid it across the smooth wood toward my father. "This is a finalized conservation easement," I stated, my voice echoing evenly in the quiet room. "I have transferred the title of the Campbell farm into an irrevocable trust. The land is now legally bound to a state agricultural preservation program. It can never be rezoned for commercial use. It can never be sold to a warehouse developer. It will be leased to a local farming cooperative, and the soil will remain undisturbed in perpetuity." Thomas stared at the heavy legal paper. His hands began to shake as he processed the legal terminology. "But Nora," he whispered, his voice dry and fragile, "where are we supposed to live? We thought you bought the lien to keep the house for us. We have nothing left. We are living in a tiny apartment on the highway. We need to go home." "You no longer own a home," I replied, maintaining steady eye contact. "You gambled your legacy on a fabricated startup and you lost the wager. The farm is shielded from your creditors, but it is also shielded from you. You are not moving back." Linda gasped, pressing her hands to her mouth. The reality of her poverty finally pierced her delusion. She realized there was no magic rescue coming to erase the consequences of their enablement. "You are our daughter," she cried, her voice trembling with genuine despair. "You have the resources. You cannot leave us to rot in a cheap rental. Family takes care of family." "We established 12 years ago that you do not view me as family," I corrected her, keeping my posture upright and relaxed. "I am a logistics director. I manage supply chains and I mitigate risk. You are a high-risk liability. However, I have drafted a secondary agreement to manage this liability." I withdrew a second document and placed it beside the conservation easement. I placed a silver pen on top of the signature line. "I have set up an automated monthly disbursement from my personal accounts," I explained, tapping the paper. "It is enough to cover the rent on your current apartment, your basic utilities, and a modest grocery stipend. You will not starve, and you will not be homeless. I will authorize this disbursement on one non-negotiable condition." Thomas looked at the paper, his eyes scanning the bold text at the top of the page. It was a formal, legally binding non-disclosure and no-contact order. "You will sign this document," I instructed. "You will agree to never contact my place of employment. You will not call my personal phone. You will not attempt to visit my residence. You will not mention my name to your friends, your neighbors, or your son. If you violate this perimeter a single time, the automated payments will cease immediately, and you will face your financial ruin without a safety net. My mother stared at me in horrified disbelief. She looked at the pristine legal document, then looked up at my face, searching for a trace of the desperate, compliant girl she used to command. She found nothing but a blank corporate wall. You are treating us like a hostile vendor. Linda sobbed, the tears falling freely onto the mahogany table. You are treating your own parents like a bad business transaction. I did not offer her a tissue. I did not soften my expression. I looked at the two people who had canceled my 30th birthday to cover a casino debt. The people who had abandoned me for over a decade, and the people who had gladly offered my financial future as collateral for their golden child. You spent my entire life treating me like an administrative assistant. I said, my voice carrying the cool, unshakable certainty of a woman who has finally closed a toxic account. You required me to manage the background mechanics of this family while you handed all your love and resources to Brent. You demanded paperwork and receipts for my existence while you subsidized his fiction. I am simply matching your management style. I am handling you administratively. The room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. Thomas looked at the silver pen resting on the table. He looked at his wife, who was weeping quietly into her hands. He looked at the daughter he had consistently underestimated. He realized he had no leverage, no authority, and no remaining options. He picked up the pen. His hand trembled as he signed his name on the bottom line. He passed the pen to Linda. She signed her name without looking up. They signed the paperwork in total silence, surrendering their parental titles in exchange for basic survival. I walked out of the mahogany conference room that afternoon and felt a distinct shift in atmospheric pressure. People often misunderstand the mechanics of retribution. They envision cinematic confrontations involving raised voices, shattered glass, and dramatic declarations of victory. True power operates on a much quieter frequency. True power is not destroying the people who harmed you. It is rendering them entirely irrelevant to your future. I did not dismantle my family. I merely stopped functioning as their safety net. When a person insists on leaping off a cliff, stepping aside is not an act of hostility. It is an act of self-preservation. Gravity did the rest of the heavy lifting. Brent was currently navigating the brutal realities of the federal justice system without a proxy to absorb his penalties. His days were consumed by public defenders, asset forfeiture hearings, and the harsh fluorescent lights of municipal courtrooms. The charismatic entrepreneur facade had crumbled, leaving behind a terrified man facing federal wire fraud charges. Thomas and Linda were adjusting to a rigid existence governed by the strict parameters of the non-disclosure agreement. They lived in a modest two-bedroom unit near the interstate. Their monthly rent and grocery stipend arrived via automated clearinghouse transfer on the first day of every month, contingent upon their unwavering silence. They had spent 40 years subsidizing chaos, and they were finally reaping the harvest they planted. About 3 weeks after our final meeting, I retrieved the mail from the silver box at the end of my driveway. Interspersed among the catalogs and utility bills was a plain white envelope. The return address featured the street name of my parents' new apartment complex. The handwriting was jagged and hesitant. Thomas had sent a letter. I carried the stack of mail into my kitchen, placed my keys on the counter, and used a brass opener to slice the seal. I unfolded the lined notebook paper. The ink was slightly smudged near the top corner. I read the opening paragraph. Thomas wrote about regret, blending vague apologies with persistent justifications. He claimed the stress of Brent's legal troubles was breaking his heart and exacerbating his blood pressure. He begged for a return to how things used to be, asking if I might find the grace to visit them for Sunday dinner so we could heal as a family. He mentioned that Linda cried every day and that they were struggling to understand how our family bond had deteriorated into a legal contract. How things used to be. The phrase stood out, glaring in its lack of self-awareness. How things used to be meant me operating as a silent, unappreciated utility while they showered my brother with unearned adulation. How things used to be meant canceling my milestone birthday to finance a gambling debt. They did not miss me. They missed the convenience of my compliance. I did not read the rest of the page. I did not weep over the missed potential of a loving father. I did not march out to the backyard fire pit and burn the pages in a symbolic display of emotional closure. Melodrama is a tax levied on the undisciplined. It requires energy I prefer to invest elsewhere. I simply walked into my home office, opened the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet, and slipped the letter into a manila folder labeled Miscellaneous Correspondence. I closed the drawer with a solid metallic click. The ledger was officially balanced. The account containing my need for their approval was permanently closed. The ensuing months offered a profound, uninterrupted tranquility. My morning routine became a sanctuary of predictable comfort. I wake at 5:30, grind dark roast coffee beans, and sit on my wraparound porch, watching the sunrise over the Missouri landscape. The air is clean, smelling of dew and damp soil. There are no frantic phone calls demanding emergency funds. There are no fabricated crises requiring my immediate logistical intervention. My home is pristine, organized exactly to my specifications. Everything possesses a distinct place and a distinct purpose. I water my plants, read industry journals, and enjoy the pure, unadulterated silence of a life free from parasites. At the corporate distribution hub, my authority solidified into an unshakable foundation. My colleagues do not view me as a background mechanism to be exploited. They look to me for strategic direction during complex freight shortages. I navigate multi-million-dollar transport negotiations with the calm certainty of a professional who has stared down a fraudulent private equity firm and won. When I speak in board meetings, the executive team listens intently. I command respect because I provide undeniable value and I require receipts for every transaction. Harlan Vance occasionally joins me for lunch at the downtown diner. We discuss changes in state agricultural zoning laws and the shifting dynamics of the supply chain sector. He never asks about Thomas or Linda, understanding that a resolved contract requires no further discussion. He treats me as an equal, a fellow pragmatist, who understands that the law is a tool best used by those who keep their emotions in check. I found immense satisfaction in the mundane details of my existence. I planted a garden in the backyard, cultivating tomatoes and peppers in raised wooden beds. I mapped the watering schedules with the same precision I applied to freight routes. Watching a seed grow into something tangible and nourishing provided a sharp contrast to the toxic, barren environment I had escaped. My parents had spent their lives pouring water onto concrete expecting a harvest. I was finally nurturing soil that could yield a return. As autumn faded into a cold, clear winter, my calendar began to turn toward the spring. The frost hardened the Missouri ground, turning the fields rigid and dormant. I sat in my home office one evening, reviewing my personal schedule for the upcoming quarter. I noted the approach of a date that had remained vacant and ignored for over a decade. I had spent 12 years pretending that specific week in April did not exist, burying the memory of the untouched catered dinner and the ticking antique clock. I had allowed the ghost of my 30th year to dictate my relationship with celebrating my own existence. But a properly audited life requires acknowledging every data point. You cannot build a pristine future if you are still tiptoeing around a historical pothole. I realized I no longer needed to hide from my own timeline. The shadow of my 30th year had finally been eradicated. The people who ruined it were neutralized, contained by their own greed and restricted by my legal boundaries. I picked up a pen and circled the upcoming date on my leather-bound planner, preparing to reclaim the milestone they had stolen. The month of April arrived with a gentle thaw, melting the last remnants of winter from the Missouri soil. For 13 years, I treated the second week of this month as a logistical error, a date to be skipped over and ignored. I allowed the memory of untouched catering and a ticking antique clock to dictate my relationship with my own birth. A pragmatic mind understands that avoiding a data point doesn't erase it from the ledger. It merely leaves a vulnerability in the system. I decided it was time to close that vulnerability. I was turning 43. I chose to reclaim the celebration my parents had canceled. I approached the planning of my birthday with the exact precision I apply to a global supply chain rollout. I didn't rely on anyone else to secure the venue, order the food, or curate the guest list. I removed the variables of human unreliability. I chose Kansas City for the location. There was a poetic symmetry in selecting the city where my brother had attempted to build his fraudulent empire. He used this skyline as a backdrop for his theft. I was going to use it as the setting for my triumph. I booked the rooftop terrace of an upscale hotel downtown, a space defined by sleek glass, polished steel, and unobstructed views of the urban landscape. The evening of the event was flawless. I wore a tailored emerald green suit. The fabric was sharp and structured, projecting the authority of a woman who requires no validation. I stood near the entrance of the terrace and watched my guests arrive. I invited 40 people. These weren't relatives bound by a sense of toxic obligation. These were colleagues who stood beside me during complex freight negotiations. These were neighbors who watered my garden when I traveled for business. These were mentors who provided me with the legal architecture to defend my sanctuary. Harlan Vance arrived wearing a classic charcoal blazer, carrying a wrapped gift that looked suspiciously like a rare volume of property law. He smiled, offering a firm handshake that spoke of deep mutual respect. Sarah, the general counsel who secured my corporate perimeter, arrived shortly after. She held a glass of sparkling water, making dry jokes about risk compliance. The atmosphere hummed with genuine warmth. There was no tension. There were no hushed arguments in the corner. There was only the relaxed cadence of people who show up when they promise to show up. I worked with the catering director to design the menu. I requested roasted rosemary chicken and warm artisan bread. It was the exact meal I ordered 13 years prior. Back then, the food grew cold on my granite counter while I packed my life into cardboard boxes. Tonight, the dish was served hot, passed around on silver trays by attentive staff, and enjoyed by people who valued my presence. Eating that meal felt like balancing a long, overdue account. The flavor was rich, grounding, and devoid of bitter memories. Earlier in the evening, Harlan tapped a silver spoon against his crystal glass, calling the terrace to attention. He didn't offer a rambling, emotional speech. He spoke with the measured cadence of a retired judge, rendering a favorable verdict. He raised his glass to the crowd and spoke about the rare quality of true resilience. He noted that in a world filled with people who manufacture chaos, there are a vital few who dedicate their lives to restoring order. He looked directly at me when he said that true strength isn't loud. It is the quiet, relentless pursuit of stability. The guests raised their glasses in unison. I accepted the toast without deflecting the praise. I earned every word of it. As the evening progressed, the jazz quartet I hired began to play a slow, rhythmic set. The conversation flowed easily around the glowing fire pits scattered across the terrace. I excused myself from a discussion regarding upcoming agricultural tariffs and walked toward the edge of the rooftop. I stepped past the sliding glass partitions and out onto the open balcony. The night air was crisp, carrying the faint metallic scent of the city. I rested my hands on the cool steel railing and looked out over Kansas City. The streets below formed a perfect illuminated grid. Headlights moved in steady streams along the interstate. Office buildings glowed against the dark sky, monuments to commerce and logistics. I stood high above the pavement, feeling the solid concrete beneath my shoes. I wasn't hiding behind a desk. I wasn't shrinking into the background to make room for someone else's fragile ego. I was fully visible, standing in the center of a life I built with my own hands, looking down at the city grid. I thought about the rented apartment near the highway where Thomas and Linda now resided. I thought about the austere federal facility where Brent was currently learning the harsh reality of structured routines. They spent their lives chasing shortcuts, relying on deception and emotional extortion to fund their comfort. Their foundation was built on sand, and the inevitable tide of consequence washed it away. My foundation rested on the bedrock of empirical truth. I chose the difficult path of accountability, and it led me to this elevated terrace. I thought about the cargo ships navigating the treacherous currents of the Mississippi River. I thought about the freight trains carrying vital grain yields across the vast expanse of the American Midwest. The entire logistical network operates on a fundamental principle of trust, verified by rigorous documentation. When a link in that chain fails, the system doesn't pause to offer sympathy. The system isolates the failure, reroutes the resources, and maintains the forward momentum. I applied that exact principle to my own existence. I isolated the toxic variables. I rerouted my energy away from a family that viewed me as a disposable asset, directing it toward a career and a community that recognized my inherent value. I took a deep breath, letting the cool evening air fill my lungs. I felt a profound sense of closure. The phantom weight of the administrative daughter role finally dissipated. I no longer carried the burden of managing their inevitable disasters. I was no longer responsible for intercepting their bad decisions before they hit the ground. The energy I used to expend on their survival was now entirely my own. If you are listening to this, and you are exhausted from trying to fix a machine that was designed to break you, I need you to hear this truth. You don't have to set yourself on fire to keep their illusions warm. You don't owe anyone a seat at your table simply because they share your bloodline. People who demand your silence to keep their peace are only protecting their right to hurt you. Let the paperwork speak, and let the truth do the heavy lifting. The Show Me State is more than a geographic location. It is a protective philosophy. When someone shows you their capacity for betrayal, believe the data. Don't wait for them to change the manifest. Adjust your route, secure your cargo, and drive forward without checking the rearview mirror. I turned away from the railing and looked back through the glass partitions. My guests were laughing, sharing stories, and enjoying the life I curated. I realized in that moment that I finally received the one gift I always wanted. I didn't ask for material wealth or loud declarations of affection. I only ever desired absolute autonomy. I achieved it. I am the master of my own logistics. I dictate the terms of my own finances. I am the sole architect of my own peace. No one can forge my signature on the blueprint of my future. No one can cancel my joy. I picked up the crystal flute resting on the small cocktail table beside me. The sparkling cider caught the ambient light from the city below, shimmering with a clear golden hue. The jazz quartet hit a perfect resonant final chord, the sound drifting out into the night sky. I raised the glass to myself, saluting the 30-year-old woman who had the courage to pack her boxes and walk away. I stood in the quiet night, fully visible, firmly planted, and utterly untouchable.
There is a specific profound silence that falls over a house when the truth finally outpaces the lies. It is not the peaceful quiet of a Sunday morning. It is the heavy, suffocating stillness of a collapsed illusion. When we survey the wreckage of the Campbell family, Thomas clutching his chest in a municipal building, Linda weeping over a depleted bank account, and Brent raging against the parents he bankrupted, it is tempting to judge them as a rare anomaly, but they are not an outlier. Their downfall is a distinctly American tragedy, woven from the threads of our most fundamental societal pressures: the relentless pursuit of the American dream, the desperate need to maintain appearances, and the tragic misinterpretation of what it means to truly love a child. Parenting, particularly within the traditional American family structure, often carries a hidden, corrosive burden. Society conditions us to believe that our children are direct reflections of our own worth. If they achieve, we have succeeded. If they falter, we are somehow deficient. This intense pressure creates a dangerous blind spot. Thomas and Linda suffered from a profound lack of emotional awareness. They loved their son, but their affection was blind, clouded by an intoxicating cocktail of parental ego and stubborn denial. In their desperation to see Brent as a charismatic entrepreneur, they chose to ignore the gambling debts, the fabricated emergencies, and the forged documents. They fell into the familiar trap of the golden child syndrome, building a pristine monument to a son who did not exist in reality. True wisdom in parenting requires the courage to look at your child and see reality, rather than a projection of your own unfulfilled ambitions. To look away from a child's flaws is not an act of protection, it is an act of deep enablement. When parents tolerate deceit to keep the peace, they are actively robbing their child of the crucial opportunity to mature. Emotional awareness means recognizing that love must always be paired with clarity. Without the anchor of truth, affection mutates into a tool for mutual destruction. The ethical failure of the Campbell family extends far beyond Brent's deceit. It rests heavily on how they treated their daughter Nora. In traditional family dynamics, there is often a quiet, unspoken reliance on the responsible child. The phrase "family takes care of family" is a beautiful sentiment in theory, but in practice it is frequently weaponized. It becomes a convenient mechanism to exploit the capable sibling, demanding that they subsidize the reckless choices of the favored one. Fairness is the bedrock of a functional family. When parents force a reliable daughter to sacrifice her milestones, her finances, and her peace of mind to bail out an irresponsible son, they shatter that bedrock. They teach the chaotic child that actions have no consequences, and they teach the responsible child that her achievements are merely resources waiting to be harvested. True familial ethics demand that we respect the law of cause and effect. Every individual, regardless of their bloodline, must carry the weight of their own decisions. Constantly sweeping up the broken glass left behind by a reckless child does not teach them how to walk carefully. It only teaches them that someone else will always bleed for their mistakes. Breaking a toxic cycle requires a formidable level of fortitude. For any parent, stepping aside and allowing a child to face the devastating consequences of their own actions is agonizing. It feels contrary to every biological instinct. Yet this is the very essence of tough love. Thomas and Linda lacked the fortitude to sever their attachment to their own social standing. They were so terrified of the public shame associated with a failing son that they were willing to sacrifice their ancestral farm to a predatory lender just to keep the illusion intact. They clung to their pride until it dragged them underwater. It takes immense bravery to drop the rope. It requires a parent to abandon their ego, to stop worrying about the whispers of the neighbors, and to accept that their child might stumble, fall, and face ruin. Sometimes the most profound act of parental love is a closed door. The temporary cruelty of saying no to a manufactured crisis is often the only catalyst strong enough to wake a child from their delusion. You cannot save a person who refuses to be saved, and attempting to do so will only pull you into their abyss. True peace does not come from bending the world to fit a perfect script. It comes from repairing your own internal boundaries and letting the chips fall where they may. The story of Nora Campbell is a stark reminder that we must cultivate our own gardens rather than pouring water onto concrete and begging for a harvest. It teaches us that setting boundaries is not an act of cruelty, but an act of profound self-preservation. If you have ever found yourself standing in the wreckage of someone else's bad choices, wondering why your silent endurance was never rewarded, know that you are not alone. There is power in stepping away. There is grace in refusing to participate in a lie. If these reflections resonate with your own journey, I invite you to join our community. Subscribe to Orange Vengeance, where we explore the quiet strength it takes to enforce boundaries. Demand proof and walk away from the noise. Share your thoughts in the comments and let us know where you draw your lines in the sand. As the dust settles on the Campbell farm, we are left to ponder the quiet corridors of our own homes. We look at the chairs at our dining tables, the unread messages on our phones, and the unspoken expectations hovering in the air. We are forced to ask ourselves a difficult, lingering question. Are we holding on to the people we love because it truly helps them grow? Or are we holding on simply because we are terrified of the empty space they would leave behind? And when the knock inevitably comes at your door in the middle of the night, demanding a sacrifice you can no longer afford to make, will you turn the lock, or will you let the ghost inside?